Gentlemen, welcome back to part 4, module number 4 of Hilchot Milchama, the laws of war. We're still getting our army together. Last we spoke, we needed to get the Haredi draft going in order to increase our ranks and fulfill the mitzvot properly. Now, we have to discuss who else should really be joining us. Are women supposed to be in the army? Are they not supposed to be in the army? Is it up to them? Women of the IDF, Giyus Nashim, usually you see videos, women of the IDF, showing the gvura, the strength, the courage of how women can fight in the army. Well, we'll see. Maybe this shouldn't be the case. Maybe it should be. Be'ezrat Hashem. And you'll pardon me that this module will be even more entrenched, unfortunately, in modern day issues and not just in the sources, because they're irrelevant to the sources at hand as well. But Be'ezrat Hashem, we will practice some Tohar HaNeshek going forward after this one. We will keep our course free of some of these leadership issues, hopefully going forwards, but it's relevant to our module extremely, so we'll have no choice. So just to begin, Rabotai, to define our terms, women in Israel are not obligated to join the army per se. They get a tzav rishon, if I understand correctly. I live in Chutz La'aretz, so I might be making mistakes throughout this. You're always welcome to correct me. Women of the IDF, women of Israel, citizens are obligated to show up at Lishkat Giyus to either join the army or to declare their datiyut and request an exemption. And they are not obligated to join the army in that sense. They have a choice whether or not they want to join the army. And once they join the army, there are different units, different yechidot. There are combat units, non-combat units, and then there's the option of doing Sherut Le'umi. Sherut Le'umi means national service. You go, you volunteer in some organization, a library, a nursing home, a hospital, a police office, whatever it is, to help out in some way, shape, or form. And we will see, Be'ezrat Hashem, how all three of these things are potentially problematic. Combat for its values, non-combat for its issues, and then even Sherut Le'umi, believe it or not, can be pretty broken. Unfortunately, the state of the Sherut Le'umi option today, there are many Rabbanim who are against it for it being a broken system that is inefficient and potentially worthless. To the point that many today recommend, just to get to the bottom line, to explain to you, many recommend don't even do Sherut Le'umi, just go straight to whatever you want to go to afterwards. College, seminar, mashihiyeh, work, whatever, get married, have children. Don't worry about Sherut Le'umi. Whereas others are pro Sherut Le'umi if you do it right. Now, we're going to discuss primarily today combat versus non-combat. That's why I just pointed out the bottom line of Sherut Le'umi already. Now, let's talk about the army. Women at war. I want to discuss our goals for this module. We're going to discuss the sources, exploring the sources in Tanakh, in Chazal, in Halacha, with respect to women's participation in war. And then we will discuss the practical challenges today, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and nationally. And we'll conclude with the perspectives of the leaders of today. First of all, women in the wars of Tanakh. I query my students to provide. One of my students actually asked me very nicely, where do we find in Tanakh that women ever participated in war? In fact, that's true. We don't have any records of women in battle. Only Devorah leading the battle with Barak, and even then she was pretty hesitant to join in the first place. And Yael accidentally joining the war efforts and killing Sisera. We don't really have any records of women joining the armed forces of Israel at any point in history, in any point in the Torah for sure. Only eligible men are ever counted. There's so many counts, so many tallies and censuses in the Torah. They never counts women. It's always men who are eligible for war above the age of 20 and on. What does that show you about the basic assumption the Torah has about women's role in war? It's kimat nothing. There is never any expectation that women are going to go to battle. And we discussed the parasha of the Mishuach Melchama in the last module and in the next one. The only people who are ever exempted from war are the men, for the various reasons given. It doesn't say it never tells us that a bride is piturah. You might say the Torah only speaks to men, but I think that in this case, although that is true, the examples given demonstrate for us that the Torah is only intending for men to be the audience in the first place about these mitzvot. Now, to be even more clear, the Sefer HaChinuch, in outlining all of the mitzvot of Parashat Ki Tetzeh, tells us time and time again that the only people obligated in these wars are the men. The one exception is the Shiv'a Amin of Canaan, where the women are included in that mitzvah, but it seems like that's the exception, not the rule, and certainly by not related to the war effort, more in just exterminating those people, not really related to the mitzvah of war itself, which nowadays, as much, no, we're not dealing with them, so it doesn't really matter. Now, since Tanakh is not really helping us in terms of directly addressing the question of women at war, we have to turn to Chazal. The Chachamim tell us in Masechet Yevamot that ish darko lechabesh ve'ein isha darka lechabesh. The Torah, Rabbi Elazar says in Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, the Torah says umilu et haaretz v'kivshua, you have to conquer the land. The Gemara derives from there that we're really referring only to men, not to women. So that already is one thing. Women don't have to conquer. Well, okay, but there's other things that you can do in the war effort, right? So, you have to be on the front lines. Maybe you can be shooting artillery from behind. Maybe you could be flying a plane. You don't have to be on the ground. So the Gemara tells us in Kiddushin, Darko shel ish la'asot milchama, ein darkah shel isha la'isha la'asot milchama. Women don't go to war, period. That's what the Torah says. And the Gemara says, women are not supposed to go to war. Okay. You might say pikuach nefesh. You might say things can get crazy. And in fact, one of the great Talmidim in our class pointed out a great diuk in the Rambam we saw already. Let's look in the Rambam. The Rambam we saw this last week. Famous Rambam about the difference between milchamet harishut and milchamet mitzvah. That by milchamet harishut we have all the piturim of the mishruach milchama. But in milchamet mitzvah, afilu chatan mechedro. You see, afilu chatan mechedro. The chala michupata. Look, the chatan has to go to war, and the kala does too. They can fight on the front lines, like all these great pictures and videos you see of couples who are serving in Gaza together, meeting each other and giving each other a hug and then going back to battle. Beautiful, right? Isn't that what the Rambam says? Isn't it explicit in this Rambam that women are supposed to go to war just like that? Even milchamet mitzvah, which we said we have. Women have to go to war. The truth is, if you only read the Rambam superficially and you specifically neglected using a Rambam with commentaries, you would think so. But if you just open the Radbaz, who is literally on the margin of the Rambam, the standard prince of the Mishneh Torah, you would see the Radbaz writes 500 years ago, right? What the women go to war? Because the Rambam is really quoting the Mishnah, right? In Masechet Sotah. It's not his own words that he's borrowing. A woman's role is to be home. She's a princess. She's the daughter of the king of the Ribono Shel Olam. It's the husbands who miskenim have to go out into the world. The woman has the right and the opportunity and the privilege of living in her palace, in her home. That's her honor, her dignity. Suddenly the Rambam is telling us, what? So answers like this. Number two answers. Number one, the Harikar. This is what it means to say. When the Chatan, because the Chatan had to leave, okay, so byproduct, kala yotza v'chupata. You're not gonna have a wedding without a groom. If the groom can't show up, the groom has to leave early. The kala is gonna leave too. There's no reason for her to be there. She'ena noheged yemei chuppah. So during Sheva Berachot, very nice. She was celebrating, but now she can't. So she's gonna go back to her father's house or whatever it is, and wait until her husband comes back home. A guy's wife, and a guy gets married, he moves into his apartment with his wife, and his wife has to fly away somewhere for some family simcha or whatever it is. So a guy might just get up and go to his parents' house for a week. Why not? Same thing with the girl. Ve'efshar, div milchamet mitzvah, number two. Option number two. And milchamet mitzvah, hanashim hayu misapeko mayu mazon leva'alihen. Answer number two, the Radbaz says, more practical. Okay. Women have to come help, but they don't have to be on the front lines. They don't have to be in combat. They can be in non-combat. They can help provide Mayim Muslim for their husbands, not other people's husbands, by the way, for their husbands. That they should go and provide for their husbands on the battlefield. Someone has to cook for them. Husbands are going to be busy. So the women have to go shech the chickens, salt them, cook them, prepare them, and send them to the battlefield. The Radbaz lived in Mitzrayim and Yerushalayim. He says that was the minhag nowadays in the Arab lands. Okay, beautiful. That's the Radbaz. Truth is, there are a couple other resolutions for this Rambam. Number one, even if the women are in the chamber, even if the kala mitoch chupata, the chatan is yotze mechedro. That's option number one. Number two, as we said, the Radbaz says when the chatan goes to war, by extension, the kala has to leave the room also. Number three, they have different war roles in the war effort. And number four, I thought was very nice, that the whole idea is a little bit exaggerated because this is just poetic language borrowed from a pasuk in Yoel. Now, that's what in terms of women's role it seems like there's little to no reason for women to be at the battlefield other than to provide for their husbands. But in terms of taking active duty, combat roles, certainly that is not the role that women are supposed to be taking. And on top of that, we find that it's really not their nature. Women are supposed to be at home. They're supposed to be pacifist people, not aiming for belligerent war and violence. Now, I want to point out another major issue, but for that we have to study last week's parasha for a second. The Torah tells us in parasha Ki Tetzeva Kedushat HaMachane, Ki Tetzeh Machane Al Oivecha V'Nishmartam Mikol Davar Ra. When you go out to war in your camp against your enemies, so you have to make sure you're safe from evil. So number one, if a person becomes a Baal Keri, he has nocturnal emissions, he has to leave the camp until he becomes pure, then he may return. And number two, make sure the outhouse is outside of the camp and you have to cover it up when you're done. Beautiful. The Torah concludes this section and says, Ki Adonai Elohecha mithalech v'kerev machanecha. Hashem is in your midst, in your camp. L'hatzilecha, to save you. He's not there to just watch. He's there to help. La'atet oyevecha l'fanecha, and to get rid of your enemies in front of you. V'hayam machanecha kadosh, and you have to have a holy nation, holy camp. V'lo yira'eh b'cha ervat davar. Make sure there's nothing inappropriate happening in your camp, because if there is, v'shav me'acharecha, the Ribbono Shel Olam will leave. And guess what? He was saving you, and now he's leaving. Is this such a good thing, Rabotai? Let's look at Parashat Pinchas, Parashat Balak. After Bilam failed with his master plan, he told Balak, Elohem shel edu soneh zimahu. God hates promiscuity. Lo yareh b'chayervat davar. Stay far away from promiscuity. And then he concocted this whole plan with the girls who were going to stay like prostitutes in the market and covered up prostitutes, and then would entice the Jewish people to come and buy stuff and then get them to do avodah zarah and be promiscuous with them. And it led to the death of thousands of Jewish people. The whole incident with Zimri and Pinchas. It's a horrendous idea in Ruchaniyut and Gashmiyut to have women in the war, in the battlefield, Rabotai. Promiscuity inhibits productivity. Look at what happens in the Torah. And based on that, I want to do some basic arithmetic with you, Rabotai. Let's take some 18-year-old boys and throw them in the same pot as some 18-year-old girls in small groups for extended periods of time. And what do we get, Rabotai? An idiotic idea. But that's really just what secular college is. That's not really the army. Let's look at the army for a second. The army is 18-year-old boys with 18-year-old girls and small groups of people for extended periods of time. And army life, where temptations run even higher. Testosterone, adrenaline, excitement, frustration. Anything could happen, especially when you're turned on to kill people. It could really lead you to do very, very significant, serious things. Which means that this is a demented, insane, and delirious idea to think that it would be productive to have women in the same units as men in war. So mixed combat units are certainly a moronic idea. Hence, the Torah tells us about Eshedifat Torah. That the Torah recognizes there's a real emotional, hormonal problem here. It's called human nature. And people are apt to give into their temptation. So the Torah actually permitted it in a certain way that hopefully will curtail your excitement. Certainly, it would be a stupid idea to introduce more of it, more than what the Torah expects of us. So from a practical perspective, people say, pikuach nefesh, we have to have girls in the army. First of all, let's talk about the numbers. Second of all, pikuach nefesh is for them to be in the army. It will kill us if they join the army. More than it will kill us if they don't join the army. If they're not there, then the Shekhinah will take care of us. Lahatzilecha. But if they come and there's ervat avar, rabotai, it's going to be pikuach nefesh on us for us to be in that army with the women. It's just natural. Boys and girls, as much as they might have grown up with values, as much as they might have grown up educated in a certain way, you leave them alone for long enough, will lead them to do bad things. There's no reason to drink poison and hope that it'll be okay. There's another avera. The Torah tells us, Lo yeh kele gever alisha. Man may not wear women's clothing, which is not really a problem here. But lo yubash gever simlat isha. He can't wear her clothing. Sorry, I misspoke. Lo yeh gever alisha. It is a problem for women to wear men's clothing. Namely, Seemingly, they're guns, they're weapons. It's not normal for women to go to war. So there's a whole discussion. Can women bear arms? And also, can women wear pants in the army? But I want to focus on one thing for a second before we get to the practical. The reason is ki to'avad Adonai Elohecha kol oseh ele. It's abominable to God that men should dress like women and women should dress like men. So Baruch Hashem, the army provides skirts. Not necessarily are they so comfortable or available or usable, but on paper they're provided. Now let's talk about the details of that. Number one is to'avat Adonai kol oseh ele. We have to remember the bottom line, the bare minimum idea is that God hates this. And number two, based on Onkelos, it very much applies to weaponry, not just clothing. Kli gever doesn't just mean clothing, it also means the tools, the weapons of men. Number three, the Targum Yerushalmi, Yonatan actually points out this is exactly why Yael used a peg to kill Sisera and not a weapon, because she figured, why should I take on a man's tools? You kill him with another tool. Obviously, if she couldn't, she would have used something else, like a weapon. But she tried to avoid the violation of Kli Gever. And Ibn Ezra points out the purpose of the mitzvah is to safeguard against promiscuity. Rabotai, women in a men's army, when they don't have to be there, and asking them now to dress like men and take upon men's roles and men's tools in a way that leads to promiscuity, is asking for a heter just to do an isur. Yes, pikuach nefesh, it justifies, wearing pants to do that crazy training thing, because you can't do a skirt while you're running across the desert, obviously, for 3 hours straight. You can't wear a skirt while you're doing an obstacle course. It's not a good idea either. But it's also just like you're asking for a heter to enter the realm of isur. So practically speaking, yes, it's fine for a woman to learn how to shoot for protection of our people. Teachers in schools, the Posekim, right? Chacham Ovadia, Tzitz Eliezer, and Chaim David Halevi, all right, it's totally fine for women to learn how to shoot a gun, but it has to be done with seniut. Seniut is a value. It can't be men mixed with women in any combat role, even if it's civilian combat roles. And that's in the zechut of our Nashim Tzidkaniyot and our Talmud Torah. We have a Kiddushat HaMachaneh, and we're saved. Kol kivudah bat melech penima. And if Chas V'Shalom it's the other way, it could be much worse. My Rebbe Rav Eliyahu ben Chaim is a ben Porat Yosef. He learned in Yeshivat Porat Yosef under Chacham Ezra Atiyah, Chacham Ovadia Yosef, and Chacham Enzina Bashaul in the 50s. And he made his way to Iran, and then from there to New York, where he serves as the Rosh Yeshiva in YU and Av Beit Din in Queens and Chief Rabbi of the Meshadi community where I teach. But for our purposes, importantly, he also fought in the 6-Day War and in Milchemet Yom Kippurim. During the 6-Day War, he was in the Sinai desert, and he had these not religious soldiers with him. So they wanted to eat some chickens and nivelot. So he took their razor blades and he shechted chickens for them in the desert. He's a master shochet and everything. So his Chacham Ben Chaim is certainly not a soft personality. And he says, listen, 2 + 2 = 4. We know that in Milchemet Yom Kippurim, there was the most amount of zinut in the army. And we also know there were the most amount of casualties. The Torah tells us, don't do this or you will get killed. And guess what? We saw it with our own eyes. And it's something for us to keep in mind. So Rabotai, thus far, we said number one, it's not, the Torah does not expect women to be in the army. In fact, it's not natural for women to be in the army. And in fact, it's dangerous for women to be in the army, not just spiritually dangerous. It's actually dangerous for our war effort. It will cause us to lose the war than to win the war, for women to be engaged in battle. So now what? Well, let's think about some of the additional obstacles. Given how Eretz Yisrael is a Jewish state that does not always remember that it's the definition of being Jewish means to follow Halacha, we have to keep in mind that as much as women are not invited to the army, they're not forced to be in the army, there are many women nowadays who come from Dati Leumi homes, unfortunately, who feel that the only and most significant way that they can contribute to their country is by joining the army. So it's important to desensitize, disillusion, and disenchant those women for all the reasons above and more. And here's the more. The additional obstacles include, number one, the physical strain. that the rate of injury is extremely high for women as opposed to men. There are statistics of 40%, 60%, depending on the unit. I don't know how accurate those statistics are, and I don't know how up to date they are, but there are such statistics. And frankly, women are just made differently. Israel is one of the only armies in the world that expects women to join or even gives them the option of joining. And if you look at the military tactical literature of today and of yesteryear, there's so much about why women should not be in the army. Frankly, for women to help load up a fighter plane with its all of its ammo is literally impossible. And even to just do basic activities and exercises, the threshold of expectation for women is quite a few notches lower than it is for the men. I'm blessed to have a sister-in-law who I'm extremely proud of, who is currently doing advanced training in the army. And she said how the men are expected to scale a certain wall in the training, and the men and the women get a chair in front of the wall to help them scale it. And in addition, there's an extra, hole bored into the top of the wall, in the middle of the wall, to help the ladies grab onto that while they're climbing the wall. Also, it's just it's a fact. And if you look at apparently the Ukraine war recently, Ukraine apparently one of my Talmidim, and Jake Ordenlicht, who is a tactical military expert at his age, one day he'll be the president of the United States just so that he can nuke the rest of the world, because he knows Baruch Hashem quite a bit about how to do these things. Pointed out to me how in the Ukraine they know that women should not be serving on the front lines necessarily because they're just not as capable as the men, and they end up getting hurt more trying to fire a rocket launcher, which even the burliest guy gets pushed back when he launches a rocket, anti-tank missile, whatever. And a woman, even the strongest woman, will be knocked backwards into the building behind her and killed. So, practically speaking, it's really unrealistic for women to be physically engaged in combat, training for combat, so much room for injury. And my sister-in-law told me a great story. You'll pardon me for the crassness of the story, but sometimes it's important to be abundantly clear and brutally honest that when soldiers are training and they have to go on a masa, on a long exercise, they have to run and walk across the desert or whatever terrain, depending on their unit, carrying so much weaponry or other stuff on their backs, even stretchers and other people, for hours at a time. At the end of the masa, when there's a break, the boys get to turn to the side and relieve themselves, but the girls can't. There's a tremendous lack of ability to accommodate what a girl needs in the army. And it's simply because the army is made to be for men. It's a men's war machine. So it's important to be clear and honest about what we have. In terms of spiritual accommodations, this is true about the entire army, but for women in particular who don't necessarily have the training that men do, but also for women in general, religious women who might even have the training in the army. The army has certain spiritual accommodations. There's set numbers of minutes per day you can get for tefillah, for example, and there are expectations of keeping Shabbat. But if your commanders are not religious or they are self-declared nominally religious, they think Gamani datiya and Gamani shomer Shabbat, but they don't understand why you didn't do your laundry on Shabbat and why you're not doing workouts on Shabbat, and they think you're being a lazy bum and trying to get out of things. That's a real problem. If they say they pray, but they don't expect you to pray and they're not going to give you the time to pray, that's a serious problem. So there are all sorts of issues here in terms of being religious in the army. You have these people who are nominally religious who really make you look bad when you're the most religious person there by being just baseline Orthodox. It's a serious problem. And then even when the army gives you all these promises, these unrealized expectations are so frequent, unfulfilled promises. It's really hit or miss, the commander that you're going to get. It could ruin your time or make your time. And you might say, so what? A little bit of adversity is normal. The real world also has that adversity. But okay, listen, the idealism versus the reality is extremely important. Who told you that you have to be in the army in the first place? Who told you it's a Kiddush Hashem for a woman to be in the army and that this is the only way for you to contribute? There are so many other things you can do. This is not even your place from the Torah's perspective. What moron told you that the Torah wants you to be here and that you have to make so many sacrifices in terms of your physical, spiritual, feminine, personal, social life in order to fulfill these ideals that are self-contrived? And with that, the inevitable failures of just being able to maintain one's standards to even a bare minimum threshold degree that the rest of the army, the Haredi unit, for example, is able to do, hopefully, not even successful all the time with that, which is its own problem, is ridiculous. And on top of all of that, in case like this was into chidush to you, the problem is it is for some people, because there's a lot of false advertising that happens amongst left-wing liberal organizations that have their feminist agendas to try to have equality among women, and women have to fight, and it's a mitzvah for women to fight, and look, there's some whatever rabbi who said it's okay, and a mitzvah, shkayach. They completely rosy up the picture. They tell you on paper everything is gorgeous and beautiful, and one what a blessing it is for you to be here. And they totally ignore the fact that this is just wrong on so many levels. And as much as the Dati Leumi schools attempt to obfuscate these infiltrations to their communities, there's unfortunately a lot of work, because whenever there's something that's wrong Torah wise, they get a lot of funding and a lot of help to try to get good PR and get themselves out there in front of the girls outside of school. And then they get their way inside of school also, unfortunately. And I don't have to give names. These names change all the time. In general, same reason, but you can Google it, you'll find 1, 2, 3. If you find an organization painting a rosy picture, these are the people I'm talking about. If you find an organization is trying to disillusion you, that's exactly the good ones. And it's also important to keep in mind that there are preparatory programs. There are Tzahali and other mechinot, but I'm dafka mentioning Tzahali because from what I understand, at least they tell you that you don't belong in the army. But once you're coming, let us help you out. And even when you go to these programs, they might prepare you for a year or two and might give you some sort of hadracha. They're not on base with you. They have no control about what happens to you in your time in the army. So if your commander turns around and says, hey, you're doing shmirah tonight with a boy, I'm like, what? Shmirah with a boy? But yichud. It's like, wow, what do you want? We don't have enough staff. We have to. No. A girl doesn't necessarily have the sass and the audacity to stand up to her commander, boy or girl, religious or not, male or female, commander, religious or not. And it can be very challenging. And unless you really have the motivation, the self-fortitude, the deep conviction that what you have to be yourself and keep the halacha your way, then you're gonna falter at some point. And there's no one who can help you. Maybe you believe the Rav Tzvai can help you, maybe you don't, maybe he will help you, maybe he won't. Maybe your commander will be nice, maybe he won't. These things are such hit or miss that it's insane for a girl to go to the army for this. It's essentially like secular college in America. People go to secular college from religious homes, and they don't go to yeshivas, yeshiva college type of institutions, which we have, Baruch Hashem, enough of. Halavai, they should be full, and they have, Baruch Hashem, there's still much room for more. And you go to these secular colleges, and there's work to do on Shabbat, they're studying on Shabbat, there are girls everywhere, the boys go to minyan, and then they go to the club. Hashem Yerachem, there are parties, and all sorts of terrible things. And religious boys who come from religious backgrounds go down. Religious girls go down. And then come the people with very little background. They went to Chabad, they went to conservative shuls, and then they get introduced to Hillel. And then hopefully instead they go to Chabad and JLIC. And then they get turned on to Judaism. And it's the same thing in the army. The people who came in religious, nominally religious, or from a religious family, but they didn't actually have, the strong convictions that will help them maintain their ground against the whirlwind of the army, the hurricane of the army in their lives, of the dozens of boys in their units serenading them with 4-letter words about their femininity, and their commander is not letting them do this or telling them to do that, and they're going to fall. And they're going to become friends with people who are less religious than them, and their standards are going to fall. I saw one video of a proud father saying that his daughters and his wife had romantic relationships in the army, i.e., they met their husbands. That's completely not okay. This is a crazy thing. What a crazy world this is. But then the people who come in from a conservative home, a Masarti home, and they have a little bit of Yiddishkeit, and then for them, the army is not a compromising their standards. Their standards already don't exist or are very, very low. So for them, they only have the good things in the army. A little bit of shiur, a little bit of tehillim, a little bit of this, a chizuk from the rabbi, and then beautiful, they go up. They meet a religious soldier. The religious soldier has impact on them. Beautiful. It's very much like secular college in America. And you might say, okay, so we have all these problems. Why don't the rabbis sit down with the army and make it work, just like we do with the Nachal Haredi? So it's important to, number one, point out that the army is not interested in women being in the army. It's if you want to come to the army, you can come, but it's a men's army. And as such, we're not going to accommodate for you. If you're not comfortable, don't come. No one's forcing you to be here. Tzahal does not necessarily have this feminist agenda. Only the past few months, there's been this a little bit of a feminist agenda, and the certain organizations, lefty liberal organizations, trying to make women's combat and non-combat units. But even that's not being done properly, and is not really making any roshem. So the rabbis have tried, but ultimately, on paper, number one, it's one thing, and number two, even if there are changes, it doesn't trickle down, and the army doesn't care. The truth is, the change does have to come from the top, but it also has to be upheld at the bottom. But the top doesn't care enough to change, and the bottom thinks it knows, thinks it doesn't know, doesn't care, does care, hit or miss. And most significantly, Rabotai, once you start, you can't get out of it. Shir Leumi, if it doesn't work out, you just leave. But for the army, it doesn't work that way. Once you're in, you can't leave, and it's a big problem. So now that we discussed all that, and we went through a lot of the issues that we have today, which is so sad to talk about and so unfortunate to talk about, we have to be honest. We have to be straightforward. We can't beat around the bush. We have to talk about, so what do the Gedolim say? We discussed the sources, but we're not necessarily going to make those decisions. As much as I was told when I got married that I could make those decisions, we're not going to make those decisions. So what do the Gedolim have to say? Number one, Chazal Ish had a famous meeting with Ben Gurion, where the Chazal Ish told Ben Gurion, it's Yehareg Ve'al Ya'avor. This is well documented in history, in the papers and everything. The Chazal Ish said it's Yehareg Ve'al Ya'avor. It's a cardinal sin. It's better to give up your life than for a Haredi girl to join the army. And that's standing policy in the Haredi world today. It's usher for girls to join the armed forces in any what way. All the Gedolim Pe'echa, there's no question. It's not even a conversation. It's completely asur. But you and I might say, like, hey, wait a minute, like Yehareg Ve'al Ya'avor to be an intelligence officer, Yehareg Ve'al Ya'avor to be a teacher in the army, or many of those, in whatever non-combat way. Maybe combat I understand, but why in an all-girls unit is it Yehareg Ve'al Ya'avor? Why do we have to speak? Is that hyperbole the Chazal Ish is using? Is it a political leadership stance? What exactly is that? Well, we're not going to discuss that today, but we'll discuss how there are more nuanced approaches. And in the beginning of the Medina, there were more nuanced approaches. Where Rav Herzog and Rav Uziel, as much as the Rabbanut HaRoshit declared it asur for women to join the army, there were amongst the Gedolei HaRabbanim of the Tzionut Datit, of the religious Zionist camp, the Gedolim of the leaders of the Rabbanim, who had different opinions, somewhat nuanced opinions that were more case-by-case basis. Rav Herzog reportedly was not willing to write himself on his own letterhead that it's asur. Rav Goren said it's a mitzvah. Rav Yisraeli was not willing to take a stance. Rav Yehuda, I think, said it's asur. Rav Avram Shapira and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu said it's asur. I think Rav Uziel also said it's asur. But Rabotai, this was the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. What about today? It's 2024. We can't use last century's medical textbook in order to treat patients today. We need the people who know the situation today, who can tell us based on their efforts, their knowledge of the situation, their leadership, what we need to know today about whether or not women should have any place in the army whatsoever, combat or non-combat or shirut leumi. And the answer is an unequivocal, resounding, absolute asur. Not Yehareg Ve'al Ya'avor. Asur. It's important to distinguish. Rav Drukman, Rav Levanon, Rav Yaakov Ariel, and many other great Rabbanim, all say pe'echad. All say pe'echad. That it is completely asur for women to be in the army. It is Rav Aviner and Rav Melamed and Rav Dov Lior and Rav Nevinsal and Rav Yaakov Shapira, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu. By the way, fathers are right here, Rav Avram Shapira and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, right here. Of their sons say the same thing. Rabbotai, once upon a time, it might have been a safek. Today, it's a vadai. Vadai asur. Pe'echad. All the leadership, all the gedolim of the Dati Leumit Tzionut Datit camp all agree unequivocally that there's no room, there's no place for a religious girl in the army. Combat is beyond problematic, physically, mentally, femininity wise, and the like, nationally, socially. But on top of that, so is non-combat. You have to prepare on a base either way. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah, there are some liberal rabbis who support combat, non-combat, and even combat roles for women. But those people no one respects them. You and I don't respect those people. Those people are not recognized as leaders, as gedolim, as posikim. They might be experts in Tanakh, might be presidents of institutions, might be rabbis in some seminary for girls. But unless we're talking about specifically their group of liberal, lefty, orthodox, somewhat orthodox people whose observance of Torah mitzvot is already pretty weak, maybe they wouldn't be compromising anything by going to the army. But overall, in terms of a leadership position, if we're trying to help the Jewish people, the Tzionut Datit Pe'echad does not accept going to the army at all. If you want to read a lot about this, Rav Melamed wrote a tremendous amount about this, but everyone has an article here. Okay, we lost it for a second. We're back on. Everyone agrees that it's asur. For all the reasons above, and to be even more explicit, Rabotai, sexual harassment sexual abuse is extremely high in the army. And even if it's not an abuse, it's consensual. That's also asur. That's also lo yireh b'chayr v'atavar. And not everyone's gonna mess up like that. It doesn't matter. When leadership sees a road in the city that is extremely dangerous, people keep on getting into accidents on the road. It's a little bit of a dangerous road. It's twisty, it's turny, it's up, it's down. And so many people are getting killed on that road just because a few people managed to make it across and, save some time in whatever mission they're on. It still leads them to close the road. This is a matter of leadership. Yeah, girls can make Hesder frameworks and other stuff, but until the army is willing to sit down at the table and make it work, there's nothing to talk about. And frankly, it doesn't matter. They don't have to be there. Some rabbis like, why do we have to sit down and talk about this? They're not supposed to be there. We're supposed to follow halacha. And halacha says it's not okay. You want to make a halachic framework? Let's sit down and talk. And I believe that Tzionut Datit has invited the Ramatkal and others, the head of the army, to come and talk. But they're not interested. It's not, and rightfully so. They take the position. It's not right, I guess. So at that point, if someone is interested in looking more into this topic, Rav Lamed has written a lot about this, or Shmuel Eliyahu has spoken a lot about this. Others have written about this in one way, shape, or form. There's plenty to see and plenty to go, but this is the bottom line. In summary, women should not fight in the army, period. It would be nice if they could supply some mayim umazor to their husbands, but likely it's impossible for various other reasons, and we can take care of them anyway. Right? It's not, the Torah prescribes their role to be one of take care of the home front and non-combat, and we saw Chazal proscribe it for them to be involved. The army is full of zinut, and for them to join this zinut would be a terrible, terrible thing. It's bad enough that Kedushat HaMachane is already so weakened. We shouldn't weaken it more. It's pikuach nefesh for the women to be in the army, dati and not dati. But yes, why should the dati come and ruin it more? And plus, it might be asur for women to hold the gun. Not really, whatever. The spiritual damage, their growth trajectory, their physical damage that they are going to endure is so bad. Why would we want them to do this? There are no rabbis of stature today who support it. There might have been some attempts recently to set up all women's units, but those things are bitelim uvutalim and not with the advice, the guidance of Gedolei Hador, according to any definition of Gedolei Hador. Frankly, it's most likely impossible, but it's also unnecessary. And once they're in the army, they have no way out. Abotai, we've discussed the reasons until now. I want it to be very abundantly clear that given all of this information, it doesn't mean we should bury anybody who's in the army. We should support and encourage and be there in every what way for someone who's already in the army. Just because somebody made a mistake, a decision that we do not think is correct, and clearly the Torah does not think is correct, doesn't mean that they are damned and we have to treat them that way. There's so much potential for them to succeed, at least Hatzalah Purta. And we have to make that happen. We have to support them. The service doesn't end, life doesn't end with those 2-3 years in the army. However, they realized that before, and they could realize they could have a whole life of service of Hashem that wouldn't be ruined a little bit and be stained by this opportunity that they took in the army. Once they were there, we have to support them. We have to love them. They're still our brothers and sisters. And halavai, everyone who doesn't serve Hashem the right way should come to the right path. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.